Today I have Holy Armor with me. Some of you might know him from Red Judaism's channel. Uh, we are on the Hebraic Catholicism podcast. Today we will be discussing Turks versus Persians, the legacy of antiquity and the origins of the real medieval Islamic world. That is the secret role that the Turk-Persian struggle has played, and as well as a broader Jewish and Christian identity that has been forgotten or downplayed in histories of Middle East in the Middle Ages. We will talk about the hidden Judaic, Hebrew, and Turkic identity of the ancient Parthians and the Nestorian and Nazarene identity of the Sassanid Persians, and how through infighting these Jewish and Nazarene identities were abandoned in the 9th and 10th centuries, with a Semitic identity giving way to a new Aryan and Turanid identity. Medieval Perso-Arab Islamic culture is a synthesis of Judeo-Semitic cultural matrix under an Aryan Arab Turanid system. In a similar way, medieval feudal Europe is a synthesis of Greco-Roman cultural matrix under Germanic systems. This was due to the way the use of mercenaries from the frontier regions of Germania, Arabia, and Turania backfired against the Roman, Byzantine, and Persian empires. The Islamic Muhammad is to Perso-Arab post-Judaic Islamic culture, as Charlemagne is to Franco-Germanic Chalcedonian feudal European culture. I will show how there is no solid break between late antiquity and the Middle Ages in Afro-Eurasia. Rather, it is about an ebb and flow between the ancient Semitic Roman cultures and the new Arab, Turanid, and Germanic elements stemming from militaristic frontier societies. This is in addition to the deeper Aryan Semitic struggle, represented more specifically by the struggle of the Roman versus Judaic identity of the Mediterranean world, which formed the deeper backup of classical antiquity in its transition to late antiquity, the vanishing point being the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, which is continued in the early medieval Islamo-Byzantine struggle in a sublimated form, with the Arabs and Turanids taking the role of the Judaists after they are overthrown. The Khazars are the only remnant of this ancient Judeo-Turanid frontier society stepped in a Semitic matrix. First, we have to have an understanding of barbarogenesis and a broader hypothesis regarding the emergence of frontier empires and how these have their genesis throughout history. Some of you might have heard of Peter Turchin, who is a Russian-American ecologist turned historian who has attempted to model the growth of historical societies in correlation with demographic structural variables such as population, resources such as grain, expenditures, and warfare. His hypothesis is that there is a roughly negative correlation between warfare and population growth or social cohesion, which explains roughly 65% of the variance of the data. You can see this in his book, Historical Dynamics, Why States Rise and Fall. In his model, he has been able to show how there was greater ultra-social trait density, which represents his idea of social cohesion across the steppe frontiers in this broader Afro-Eurasian climate, which you can see over the emergence of civilizations over time, especially in the Roman and Asian worlds. Specifically, he says that despite the cultural dominance of societies with origins in Western Europe, our data indicate that for most of recorded history, Egypt, the Near East, Central Asia, and China were the predominant imperial hotspots. We have argued that here that there is a pattern due to the emergence and spread of technologies enabling more intense forms of warfare that in turn created selection pressures for the cultural evolution of norms and institutions, making possible cooperating groups numbering in the millions. In our model, the key mechanism is the elimination of groups and societies that fail to acquire or retain ultra-social institutions by a process, which they call CMLS. Because of the intensity of between-group competition that varies between space and time, we were able to test this model predictions empirically. Recent research indicates that there are strong empirical patterns linking history and geography to the current distribution of world wealth and political stability. So he goes on and how this talks about how this relates to the relationship between cultural transmission and imperial hegemony. Holy Armor, do you have any comments before we move on?
No, my friend, I'm listening.
Okay. Let me know if you have any comments in the future.
Indeed, indeed.
So here is an example, what he calls imperial density, which is the frequency at which there are higher level imperial states that emerge. And you can see that there is this conflict zone in the steppe region, which is going to be very important, and as well as in Arabia. We can relate this further to game theory proposed by Jones in 2021, who has looked at the economics and game theory elements of social history. What he calls barbarogenesis is the ethnogenesis of so-called barbarian identities. To test, which we can use to test Peter Turchin's hypothesis, he talks about how there is a paradoxical relationship between greater political power and greater instability, because when your empire expands over a large area, it becomes more and more expensive to maintain this empire, because you have to pay more and more troops, and your taxation not going to be very, very efficient. We can see parallels here with the so-called barbarian invasions in Europe in late antiquity. We have a rise in economic expenditure leading to military expansion, and then resource and demographic expansion. However, this demographic expansion related to the expansion of culture causes frontier instability and frontier warfare. Based on this proximity and constant warfare with the broader empire, in this case, the Germanic peoples versus the Roman empires, we have the quote-unquote barbarogenesis, that is the formation of barbarian militaristic identities of mercenary forces. Barbarians are not a lack of culture or lack thereof, he says. He says in a quote, barbarism is rather a special path, a recurring syndrome among folk interacting with a more complex society. We can see very obvious parallels between the Germanic tribes of Western Europe and the Turanids and Arabs of Asia. And here you see the cycles of various populations over time and how they relate to the how population relates to warfare intensity with these so-called barbarian nations. He says, furthermore, that there's a broad, if not unanimous, scholarly agreement that there was a collapse in social complexity, a decline and fall in Europe in the first millennium CE. But rather, it's not a sudden event, but rather a regional variation in the extent and timing of decline. So this seems to have intensified from the late 2nd century, which is around the time of the crisis of the 3rd century, where we begin to see many fractionalizations of the Roman Empire. So how do we apply this to the East, the Arabs and the Turanids? The Romans used the Arabs just like they used the Germanic tribes. Holland, in his book, In the Shadow of the Sword, an exploration of the origins of the Islamic world, in 2015, writes that the Arabs, just like the Germanic tribes, used by mercenaries to man their frontier in the East, allowed the formation of an independent para-Roman identity, which adopts heterodox Christianity in opposition to Roman or Chalcedonian orthodoxy. For example, the Germanic tribes adopt Arian Christianity to differentiate themselves from the Romans, because a Roman Christianity is associated with the Roman Empire. For the Arabs, they adopt, for example, Monophysite Christianity. So Holland therefore proposes an analog between these two so-called barbarian identities. We can therefore see how this tribal identity is very strong in early Islam, which we see recorded in the Islamic narrative, emerges within the context of being mercenaries for the Roman and Persian empires. For example, the struggle of the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids, who are Arabs and they're Christian Arabs, they're recently Christianized. The Ghassanids are Roman mercenaries and the Lakhmids are Persian missionaries, and they are sort of vassal states which are used against the Roman and Persian empires respectively. And we can see this emergence of a military culture, which explains the early expansion of the Arab independence movement, which eventually led to Islam against the older sedentary cultures. Any comments so far?
No, my friend, I'm still listening.
Okay. Because I just wanted to get your perspective because you're from a Middle Eastern culture. So I was wondering if you can have any personal relationship to these ideas that I'm giving out, or whether you've thought about this before.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think I have like the interesting area is the area when you're gonna talk about the Parthians and like now you're talking about general stuff that makes sounds like it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
But the part when you said
So we're going to talk
so
about.
the Germanic tribes
Go ahead.
like adopted an Aryan Christianity, right?
Yes.
That was what you said.
Yes, that's like that was a non Roman Trinitarian Christianity. They had God the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but it was a different way of looking at it as the Orthodox. Just like the Arabs had Monophysite Christianity, it's similar.
Yeah, yeah. So the Arabs have got their Monophysite Christianity from where? From the
Syriacs.
Syrians.
From the
Okay,
Syrians,
okay.
yes.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, because the Germanic tribes got Arian Christianity from the Greek, because in the early, they were converted under the Goths, primarily under this bishop called Uthila, who is a Greek bishop. Back in the early 4th century, before the Council of Nicaea, there was still a strong Arian presence in the Greek part of the Roman Empire, and that's where the Germanic tribes came from. From like Eastern and Central Europe. In that area, there were lots of Aryans before the establishment of the Roman Church.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So that's how they got their independent Aryan identity, in the same way that the Arabs got their independent Syriac monophysite identity.
Exactly. That
So
makes sense.
This leads us to relating the Parthians to the future Judeo-Turanids such as the Khazars. Just as the Romans used barbarian mercenary forces on their western and eastern frontiers, the Persians also used such forces on their northern and southern frontiers, as I had mentioned, for example, with the Lakhmids. We have the Turanids in the north and the Arabs in the south. An article by Kamaluddin, a scholar from the former Soviet Union, in 2005 proposed a Turkic origin of the Parthians. So he says that they were actually a hybrid population of Persians who settled in Central Asia and intermarried with the Turkic tribes. The name for the elite caste is Aparni, which he relates to Arsaces, the founder of the Parthian dynasty. And what's interesting also is that the city that he founds, Arsak, is the ancient form of the Greek name Rages, which is in Persian is Rai. That's the city where many caliphs are from, actually. It's very interesting. Such as Harun al-Rashid, for example, he's from Rai, which is the same city as the Parthians, Arsak. Because Arsak was founded by the Arsakids, who are the Parthians.
Where is that city located?
Sorry? This would be in near Tabaristan, in that area.
Okay.
Northern Persia, Central Asia, in the border regions, like near
Khorasan
Tehran, near not Khorasan, but in Tabaristan, near Tehran.
Okay, okay.
Because there's a lot of Turkic people in that area.
Yeah, yeah, it is kind of.
Yeah. So
probably the Qajar Turks. North of Iran as the Azeri Turks, like in that area, maybe it's more the Qajar Turks, or I don't know how you say it in English, but
Qajar, yes.
Like yeah, exactly.
So, for example, Kamaluddin also mentions a possible Parthian origin of Bahram Choban. He says that Bahram Choban was probably a Turkic Parthian. Sorry, he was a half Turkic, half Persian Parthian general in the army of Khosrow II, or sorry, the previous Khosrow, the first, I believe, who was discontent with Sassanid rule, and he said that the Sassanids overthrew the legitimate rule of the Parthians, so he wanted to restore the Parthian Empire. What's interesting is that Karaite sources suggest that the exilarch of Babylon the leader of the Jews in exile, Mar Hanani, was deposed and executed by Khosrow II in 591 for his support of Bahram Chobin as the Messiah. So, if we follow Kamaluddin's idea of linking the Parthians and the Turanids with Bahram Chobin, and the Karaite sources, which suggest a link between Jewish messianism and Bahram Chobin, we have the basis of the Judeo-Turanid identity formation, which we later see, for example, with the Khazars of the Middle Ages. For example, he says that after the well-known victory of Bahram Chobin over the army of the Hephthalites and Turks in 588, Hormuz IV, sorry, it was Hormuz IV, not Khosrow I, presented him Balkh city in all of Khorasan. After the murder of Shah Khan, his son Yiltekhin took over the fortress of Paikand. Bahram Chobin laid siege to the fortress and forced him to surrender at discretion, and he captured a great booty. However, he had sent Hormuzd only a part of it, and the rest of it he appropriated for himself. This provoked the anger of the Shahanshah, and he wiped him off his post. According to data of the Byzantine sources, after the victory of the Turks, Bahram Chobin had been sent to the Caucasus, where he was at war with the Byzantine army. In this war, Bahram Chobin suffered a defeat and an affair, and after he was wiped off his post. However, Bahram Chobin refused to submit to Hormuzd and excited revolt against him in 590 in Balkh. Before that, he concluded a treaty with the Turks and included in his army the troops of Turkish volunteers. There he set out with a united army to the capital of the Sassanids, Ctesiphon. He had been supported also by the most part of the local population. Meanwhile, the Persian aristocracy deposed Hormuzd IV and elevated to the throne his son, Khosrow II Parvuz. Bahram Chobin entered with his army to Ctesiphon and declared himself as Shahanshah. He claimed that the Sassanids under Hormuzd had usurped the throne of the Arsacids, and now he was reestablishing their right, that is, the Parthians. Khosrow II Parvuz left his capital and escaped to Byzantium to the emperors Maurice or Mauricius. After usurpation of the power of the Sassanids, Bahram Chobin reigned 1 year and even had time for minting some of his coins with his picture. In 591, the united army of the Sassanids, supported by the Byzantines, Armenians, and Georgian troops, defeated Bahram Chobin and near the river of Ballarat in Armenia. After that, he had been forced to escape to the east to the land of the Turks and settle in Fargana. He became a friend and advisor of the Turkish Hakan Barmuda and married his daughter. However, he was soon murdered by a hired assassin sent by Khosrow Parvuz. It is known that Khosrow Anushirvan had been married to the daughter of the Kurdish Hakan, named in the Armenian sources as Kayan and in Persian sources Kakim Hakan, who is identified with Istemi Hakan Gizavul. We can later see, for example, that because of the exploits by Khosrow I, who was called Anushirvan the Just, or the Immortal Spirit. His successor to the throne was the Crown Prince Hormuzd IV, who was half Turkish, and therefore was called Turkzadeh. He held the ruthless struggle against the Iranian aristocracy and priests, and the peaceful policy towards the Christians, and leaned on the people, a great part of whom were Hephthalites, Turks, and other non-Persian peoples. The marriage of the Turkish princess with the Sassanid Shah was mutually beneficial as a political step. The Sassanids were interested in such a union for having an ally against the Hephthalites, and the Turks for making influence on the policy of the Sassanids. There is an opinion that, namely to the supreme Turkish Hakan, who was a relative of the Sassanid Shah, goes back to the genealogy of the Samanid dynasty, which in some sources goes back to Khosrow I Anushirvan. Thus, the Samanids, who are later going to connect with the origins of the Hadith narrators, are in fact of Parthian and Turanid origin. We see more evidence of this broad Turanid Persian struggle in the Ju Tang Shu, which is the old book of Tang, recorded by the Tang dynasty in China, which talks about the secret history of Persia. Persia at this time, after the death of Yazdigerd III, under constant Arab and Jewish Christian onslaught, was split between four identities after the fall of the Exilarch, especially in 591. Monophysite, Nestorian, Zoroastrian, and the Manichaean. And we can link the Nazarenes with the Nestorians because they had a similar adoptionist view of Jesus. Nestorianism became the state-approved Church of Persia, but they had a falling out with, Khosrow II had a falling out with Nestorianism as well as the Exilarch due to their Judeo-Nazarene identity. Khosrow II then turned towards monophysitism, and thus there was increased influence of monophysitism in the Persian court, beginning with, for example, his wife Shirin and his advisor and physician Gabriel of Sinjar. There was a split in Persia between the Parthians and the Sassanids once again in 628 to 632 in the Persian Civil War, which we can link to the so-called Ridda Wars of the standard Islamic narrative. Here, this was an attempt by Zoroastrian and Nestorian or Nazarene Parthians, who we now know are Turanids, to take back the throne and avenge Bahram Chobin against the file Monophysite Khosrow II, because under Khosrow II, Persia had been destroyed by the Roman and Arab armies, and so they were viewed as betraying the Persian identity. This constant infighting led to the collapse of Persia's military capability of defense against the Arabs, leading to a 180 shift and alliance between the churches of Rome and the East, called monothelitism in 632, finalized in 638. Any comments?
Yeah, I was thinking about a couple of things here.
Go ahead.
You are not mentioning the Parthians in this part.
Oh, I had mentioned that they were part of the group that overthrew. There was a faction against Khosrow II. There were those who were Monophysites, and they were Sassanids. And
sorry, but I missed that. I know I can see now that you mentioned it.
They were the Monophysites and the Sassanids were associated, and the Parthians were associated with the Nestorians, the Nazarenes, and this Judeo-Turanid identity. And so there was a struggle back and forth after Khosrow was overthrown, and that's what the civil war was about. And because of that civil war, Persia was destroyed, and they had to pick up the pieces. That's why they eventually became very weak, and the Arabs were able to enter the region. And then that's why they had to have an alliance between the Church of Rome and the Church of the East in the 630s, which is called monothelitism.
You mean against the Arabs?
Yes, which is called monothelitism. Okay. It was against the Monophysites.
So Rome and Persia against the Monophysites.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a battle here, or is it just?
There's no. Battle? It's more so that they were sharing each other's military support, because they're fighting on different fronts. The Romans are fighting in the west, and the Persians are in the east, but they're supporting each other against the Arabs, who are in the middle.
But what happened between the war between the Persians and the Romans? Okay,
so Persia lost for 20 years. Persia lost all of their territories in 622 during Heraclius' offensive, which is when the Arabs became independent.
Yeah.
And then they started to ally with the Romans against the Persians, but then they turned against the Romans in 632. And then that's when the Romans and the Persians switched sides and started to fight against the Arabs.
Okay. But another thing I find interesting is that on the other slide before also, you are talking about the Turks.
Yes.
At this time, I'm imagining the Turks being, and you also mentioned Oghuz Turks, which is from Turkmenistan or something from there. But I'm imagining like the Turks being in Mongolia at this point, not in Iran or Persia and, around that part. But then again, you mentioned that Parthians are.
I said that the Parthians are
between Persian and Turks.
Yeah,
but when I read
Turks.
Sources, they refer to the Parthians as like Persians, and I have heard Afghans, because the Afghans speak the original Farsi language, so to speak.
Because the culture was very mixed in Central Asia. The Parthians don't come from Iran; they come from the Khorasan.
Exactly. But What do you count as Iran? Because
Iran
let's
is
say,
like modern Iran, basically, like the plateau
yeah, but
area.
a third of Khorasan, or even almost half of Khorasan, I think, is in Iran today.
In the bottom part, not so much the northern part is more Uzbekistan.
Yeah, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, it's split, but the cultures are very similar because there was intermarriage between the Turks and the Parthians. That's basically the idea.
Yeah. So if we speak demographically, like population-wise, you got Persians at this time, 600, the year 600, and so on. You got the Persians in Iran of today, and
or
then
the Sassanids.
Buffer zone. Yeah, the Sassanids.
Yeah,
and
the buffer zone is the Parthians.
The Parthians, which is a mix between Turks and the Persians, you say.
Yes, and then the Turks to the north.
And the Turks to the north. But the north, you mean Mongolia or you mean Uzbekistan?
No, I mean north of Uzbekistan is the Turks. But the Parthians have influence from both the Turks and the Persians.
Yeah, because one interesting thing is, if you read the Hadith, the Sunni Hadiths, you will, there is an Hadith where they are talking about, you know, you will meet the Turks, the what did it say? You will meet and fight with the Turks. They have like flat noses. They are flat faced.
Yeah, like I remember this. It was the sign of the apocalypse. That when you come across the Turks, that's going to be the sign of the apocalypse, because that's when you're fighting against Gog and Magog.
Yeah. But then who wrote these hadiths? Because if we look at the scholars that wrote these hadiths, say, for example, Bukhari or Muslim, they are, if we are going with your theory, then they are Turks. So how can they write things against the Turks?
I think they are Turks who became assimilated to Arab or Persian culture, like Parthians, and they were turning against the Turks who were more nomadic or barbaric, like they wanted to erase their past.
Yeah, this I will comment on this too. But if you ask me, I think that in the Persian Empire, including Samarkand and these places, at that time, the Persian population was much more there. It's not like today you go to Uzbekistan, they are Uzbeks, you know. There were many Persians that lived in Samarkand.
Tajikistan, for example. Tajikistan, they speak Dari, which is a dialect of Persian.
Exactly. That is the remnant of what was before.
Yeah.
But you got, you know, in Afghanistan, if you look at not the Hazar people, those with like Asian eyes, but the other Afghans, the Sunni Afghans, the Hazars are usually Shia. The Sunni Afghans, they don't look Turkic at all. They look more Persian, you know.
Yeah,
if you look at
there are definitely Persian troops that are remnant, even in Pakistan, near the Himalayas.
Yeah, but the Pakistanis don't look like Turks either. Of course, they are Hindus or Indians or
they have a mix of like Mongol, Turk, Indo-Aryan, native Dravidian, and Chinese and Arab, Persian all mixed together.
Oh. That was a huge mix, man.
Yeah, like basically because everyone was there.
Yeah, I get you, man. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was it's like you say, they wanted to erase their Turkic past, because even if you follow long after the Sasanian Empire, the Parthian Empire, you got the Safavid empires and the Qajar empires, you know. Several of these kings, of course, they were also Persian, Turkish people, mixed, many of them. Several of these kings, like, for example, you got the Shah Ismail.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ismail the First was he was a half Turkic, and he also had Byzantine ancestry.
Yeah, Georgian or Byzantine or something like that. Also, they talk about Kurdish, that he got some Kurdish roots, but however, many of these kings also in Iran or Persia at that time, they banned the Turkish language. It was that far, that they wanted to erase their past,
because they were embarrassed of being barbarians.
Yeah, they saw the Turkishness as uncivilized versus seeing the Persian culture and their Persian side as civilized.
Yeah, which is similar to the Germanic tribes in Europe where they want to become more Roman.
Yeah.
So we see, for example, Persia still continues in a much weakened state in Central Asia. In 661, according to the Jutang Shu, Peroz III, who is the son of Yazdegerd III, declares allegiance to Emperor Gaozan of Tang, who recognizes him as the Shah of Persia. So Persia is now in the Sinosphere, like Vietnam, Korea, Mongolia, etc., until the Battle of Talas in 751. At this time, there's an Umayyad Chinese struggle over Central Asia, where the Umayyads by now are going to be in Central Asia, and they're going to be fighting the Chinese, and the Persians are going to be on the side of the Chinese. The Chinese are also going to be fighting the Turks, and the Turks will be intermittently siding with the Umayyads, depending on the situation. The Tang support discontent Sassanians along with Parthians, attempting to regain Aryan Persian independence against Judeo-Arab monophysitism. So it's a three-way alliance: Rome, Persia, among the Diophasic Nestorians, and China against monophysitism, the Jews, and the Arabs. And that's the broad struggle of the 7th and early 8th century. On the other hand, the Philo-Monophysite Persians joined with the Arabs under the Maronite Abd al-Malik, his name being in Hebrew Obed Melech ben Maron, servant of the Melchizedek or Messiah, son of Maron, which is a reference to Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They are united as under Arab suzerainty with the independence of the Maronite Church in 681. This is the same year as the Council of Constantinople, which declared against monoenergism, which was Heraclius' attempt to unite with the Monophysite Syriacs and Arabs against Persia, and monothelitism, which formally separates Rome and Byzantium from the Church of the East. A second conclusion we can make is that the Diophasic Persians are the same as the Abbasids. The name Abbasid means the party of the lion. Note, for example, the lion in the Persian national emblem. We have the lion and the sun. We have this lion imagery as well in ancient Israel with the Lion of Judah. So there's a struggle between the two lions, the Semitic lion and the Aryan lion, the Lion of Judah and the Lion of Arya. Furthermore, Abbas, the origin of the Abbasid lineage, that means lion, is claimed to be the uncle of Muhammad. That is, they claim to be superior to the Semites, which is a very Aryan mentality, the idea that we are superior to the Jews and the Arabs. We can link, furthermore, the Abbasids as a subset of the broader Banu Quraysh with the Banu Ahrar, who are called the most noble family. They formerly, this family was the house of David, which Jesus belongs to, and were revered by the Judeo-Nazarenes of Al-Hira. But the Banu Ahrar, who are children of Sassanid troops with Arab women, are reminiscent of many other Persians who stationed and intermarried with the locals, such as with the Parthians. Al-Tabari says, for example, that the Abna Ahrar means the sons of the freedmen, or the sons of the noble sons, which sounds a bit like the Aryans, because the word Aryan in Persian means the noble people. So the Banu Ahrar are the sons of Aryans, which is, we can relate to sons of Cyrus, or the Banu Quraysh, the sons of Cyrus the Great. And so they're trying to again replace. There's always this attempt to replace this so-called barbarian identity, whether in Germania or Arabia or Turania, to try and say that we are actually the great civilization that we conquered. So we have these Arab and Turanid traditions trying to link themselves with Persia. Along with the Abbasids are the Barmakids emerging out of Central Asia, whom Kamaluddin also linked with the Parthians in Afghanistan. The Barmakids are going to be the prime ministers or viziers of the Abbasids early on in the late 8th century. According to Pahlavi sources, Spandiat, the son of Vistasp, has built in Balkh the flashing capital Nawazak and had found there the wonderful fire of Bahram. It might be supposed that the flashing capital of Nawazak with the wonderful fire of Bahram was none other than the Buddhist religious center Nalbahar, which means new temple in Pali Sanskrit, I believe, which was situated in the environs of Balkh and had been turned by the Sassanids into a Zoroastrian temple. The hereditary owners of Narbahar and all the landed properties belonging to this temple, as it is known with the Barmakids, who owned a large territory surrounding the Narbahar monastery. They owned also a large agricultural lustak or district named Rawan in Takharistan. According to some data, the Barmakids were of the same origin as the Samanids. This will become important for the Hadith authors. Based on the above-mentioned data, it might be supposed that after the coming to power of the Abbasids and the beginning of the process of partial restoration of pre-Islamic law system, the ancestor of the Samanid arrived from Fergana to Balkh for preserving his rights on his part of the property, which belonged to the family of Bahram children. So Balkh was the city and homeland of capital of the Arsacids, and the last period of Bahram Chilman's life in the Samanid Empire was connected with this city. The result of this was that there was a compromise between the Abbasids and the Barmakids in the early, in the mid 8th century. When the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads with the help of the Chinese, they restored the Persian Sassanid Empire, but with an agreement with the Parthian Barmakids to retain the viziership or prime minister as the heads of the administration. The Barmakids we see in the Islamic narrative instrumental in many infrastructure projects, such as building the city of Baghdad over the old city of Ctesiphon. The Barmakids eventually become too powerful, and under Harun al-Rashid, the Sassanid Abbasids are afraid of regained Parthian influence. We can compare this to the emergent Carolingian-Merovingian struggle of the same century. Pirenne, a French author and historian, in fact, in 1937 linked the rise of the Carolingians as a Roman defense and revival against the Arabs in fighting against the pro-Arab Aryan Visigoths. Even the name Charles, for example, means free man, which we can compare with the Abna Ahrar, the free ones or the noble ones. Harun al-Rashid eventually throws out the Barmakids in the early 9th century to prevent such a coup d'etat against the Abbasids. The standard Islamic narrative furthermore claims that a succession crisis breaks out between two sons of Harun al-Rashid, Al-Amin, the son of an Abbasid, that is the Sassanid mother, and Al-Mamun, son of a Persian, or which we can suspect as a Parthian mother, in 813, 8 or 13. Al-Mamun, the full Abbasid, wins out. This is perhaps actually a code for the struggle of two nations, or mothers, the Ummah, Parthian, Turania, and Aryan Persia, under a new Arab identity or father. This is where we can find the origin of the standard Islamic narrative. Back in the 760s, Al-Mansur had appointed Ibn Ishaq to write a chronicle of the history of the world, entitled Sirat Rasulullah fil Muqtada wa al-Ba'th wa al-Maghazi, which literally means the legendary journey of the messenger of God, which is, we know now is Jesus, from the foundation or beginning, in Hebrew, Yeshod and Bereshit, to the resurrection, which of course points to the resurrection of Jesus, to the expedition, that is the expansion of the Arabs. So it's basically a chronicle of the world, which is part of the Jewish and Christian literary tradition, which we see, for example, in St. Augustine. In the devastation of the Civil War, much of the infrastructure, and we can imagine literature, is destroyed or lost. Therefore, much of the Ishaqi chronicle would also be lost, and Ibn Hisham, under Al-Mamun, is commissioned to write a new chronicle favorable to the Abbasids. He rewards the Banu Quraysh in their subduing of the Turanic Tahrij and Parthian Amanid branches of the dynasty by trying to link them to the broader Persian, Abbasid, and Arab narrative. Ibn Hisham discards much of the historical chronicle and focuses on the life of quote-unquote Muhammad and the Banu Quraysh, which we know are the sons of Cyrus. Today, we know this simply as the Sirah or Legend of the Messenger of God. This is erroneously translated as the biography of the Prophet of God. Do you have any comments so far?
Not really. Maybe this Hisham.
Yes.
He wrote many, you can say, negative things about Muhammad or Muhammad. So
I thought that was Hisham. Hisham said that he removed all the negative parts.
But the one we have now, it's Hisham, right?
Yes.
Is not that was lost. So
yes.
We got the Hisham now, right?
Yeah.
But I know that it has pretty, like, I don't know, maybe it's the truth is writing.
Oh yeah.
You got some negative aspects. So if you tell this to a Muslim, he would just say, no, it's Hisham was I don't know. They will say maybe he was a Christian or he was a Jew that wanted to infiltrate and talk bad about the Prophet. I have heard it several times, and then I know there was some bad stuff there. For example, the story about Muhammad taking like a lady or an old man between two camels and strap her between two camels, and the camels go to different directions and slit her apart.
I think some of that might be a Persian propaganda against the Arabs, because they want to, a lot of the standard Islamic narrative trying to paint the Arabs as barbarians. Have you noticed that? Like, for example, they say the Arabs were nothing. They were savages. They buried their girls underground. Like, they didn't have any concept of God until Muhammad came.
Who wrote this?
Like, in the standard Islamic narrative, it talks about in the Jahiliyyah, it said, paints the Arabs as savages. Yeah. But I think it's like Persian propaganda against the Arabs, like how Ismail wanted to have propaganda against the Turkic identity. They want to erase the Arab identity and paint it, say that they are the that they want to try and they want to try and incorporate this the Arabs into this broader new Persian Empire by saying that you are savages, you have to follow our customs, and our custom is this new Muhammad.
Yeah, but who wrote this then? Was it the Abbasids?
Yeah, the Abbasids wrote it.
So the Abbasids said that
the Abbasids were Persians.
To downgrade the Arabs.
Yeah, the Abbasids were Persians, and they wanted to embarrass the Arabs in the same way, like as I said, Ismail wanted to embarrass the Turks to promote Persian culture.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's why there's such an emphasis on the Arabs being backwards and them needing God to guide them.
Yes, exactly. And another thing which we points this out, you can even see in reality, you know, always you hear the Muslims talking about the great Islamic, you know, scientists and this and that, you know, we created math and we created this and that. But
they were mostly Persians,
Exactly. The guy finding alcohol, he was Persian. Algebra was Persian. Al-Khwarizmi. All these people Sina was Persian.
Yeah, and we're going to see that all the Hadith authors are actually from Central Asia.
Yeah, besides Al-Tabari, right?
Al-Tabari is Tabaristan, but we're going to see that. So here we have the Parthian Empire. These are the two prominent cities, Arsakia, which is Ray in Persian. That's where Harun al-Rashid is from. And we have Balkh. This is the Parthians.
Who is Harun al-Rashid?
He's one of the most powerful caliphs in the Abbasids.
Okay, yeah.
He's featured in 1001 Nights.
Okay.
Here we have the Sassanid Empire. Note the presence of the Sassanid in the Hijaz and in Yemen, which is where the Banu Ahrar are from. This is why Yemen and Ethiopia are very important to the standard Islamic narrative, because it was former Persian territory.
So, excuse me, I'm interrupting. But, so the Sassanid Empire had Yemen.
They had Yemen and the
Sasanian Empire, or
was
they had like an ally.
It was it was allied with them, but they had Persian troops stationed there to defend them against Ethiopia.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
I have read this
those Persian troops are the origin of the Banu Quraysh, I think. They're Persian mixed with Arabs.
Okay, yeah.
So we have the other two cities, Al-Hira and Ctesiphon. So we can link the emergence of the Samanids to the Turanic Parthians. As I had mentioned, Bahram Choban claimed his ancestor Sasan had usurped the throne of the Arsacids, and Bahram is reestablishing the right. He concluded a treaty with the Turks and included his army of the Turkish volunteers, as was mentioned previously. Thus, we should view the Turkic invasions of the Middle Ages as nothing but a continuation of the struggle and analogous to the Germanic and Arab invasions of previous centuries. The Samanids, in fact, continued the legacy of the Barmakids in construction and infrastructure, and building civilization, laying the foundation for the next centuries of Islam. Here, the Samanids, and note, nearly all of the prominent hadith authors, except for Ibn Majah, but we're going to talk about Ibn Majah later, are from this former Samanid dominions who were Parthians. So they're not just Persians, but they're all Parthians, all the hadith authors, with the exception of Ibn Majah. But what's interesting about Ibn Majah is that all of the hadiths contained with Ibn Majah are repeated in other hadith traditions. So I'm not really sure what that means. There's maybe Ibn Majah might be made up in order to sort of distance them from Central Asia. I'm not really sure about that. That's another point of discussion.
Yeah. Can I comment on one thing?
Yeah,
there?
Go ahead.
But how are we sure that these people are of Parthian origin? Because again, as I said, probably it lived many Sasanians in Samarkand.
They could be Sasanian, but I mean they were under Parthian influence. Like the Parthian culture was here in all this area.
Correct.
Like maybe
Parthians,
not genetically, but their culture was Parthian. And that's what I mean.
Yeah. Probably genetically also they would be Parthian, because the Parthian Arab cooperation also when they fought against the Sasanian king. So probably they are Parthians.
And even here, the lifetimes of all the 6 hadith writers and even Al-Tabari are all coincident with the Samanid Empire, which the article that I had mentioned earlier said was of Parthian origin. And so we can compare this to the barbarian invasion in the West and the East. Here is the Roman and Persian empires, with the emphasis on these Arab tribes here. The barbarian invasions were in the West, then we have in the South, and we have in the Northeast with the Hephthalites and the Turks. And here is Iran Shah and the Roman Empire. And note, of course, this buffer zone here in Arabia. This is the origin of the Turks. We can see around 300 BC. Eventually, they migrate to Turkey, Iran, and the Caucasus. And these migrations, we have shown, are part of this broader military struggle between the Persian Empire and the Parthians and the Arabs. We eventually see that later on, the Turks are a bit weakened by the Mongols, who are also influenced by the Nazarene culture, because the Church of the Nazarenes, the Nestorian Church of the East in Al-Hira, has many dioceses in Central Asia and China, and in Kerala and Assyria. But after the end of the Mongols, most of the local dynasties turn against the church, the Nestorian or Nazarene Church. And for example, in China, they close most of these Christian monasteries and convert some into Buddhist ones. Here we have an attempted Turk revival under the Timurids, where they try to revive the old Turkic legacy. Of course, Timur himself was known to be a very barbaric leader and sort of resurrected this barbarian identity of the Islamic world, and destroyed much of the Persian legacy of the Islamic Golden Age. And that's the end of the presentation.
Can I just ask you one thing? The map you showed there, where did you get that?
The last one?
Yeah,
this one?
Because I don't see Armenia there.
Oh, it says Georgia. So this was in the later Middle Ages. There wasn't Armenia had become under Turkish influence.
You mean Persia?
Well, Persian, yeah, I guess. Well, this is the Timurid Empire. I guess they don't necessarily have room, but maybe they didn't have room for the name Armenia.
Yeah, because Georgia was, for example, as you know, with the church, Georgia was always under the Armenian church or under Armenian.
The Georgian church split
influence.
off from the Armenian church because of the Georgian church wanted to align with the Roman Diophysite church.
Yeah. So they betrayed the Monophysite. View.
The Georgian church used to be part of the Armenian church. That's what the I'm later going to talk about the Armenian church later this week or next week. I'm going to talk about Surah 2, for example, which I think is related to Armenia. So that's my presentation.
That is interesting.